the Owens Art Gallery and Jemmy Kelly. And thank you also to Struts and Fawcett, who all partnered together to make this happen. I really appreciate it. I'm always a tiny bit nervous when I start, but I'll warm up. And I want to say also that it's going to be maybe a tiny bit theoretical at the beginning. I find that I've taken a lot of time over the years to try to find texts that I feel can express some of my ideas in perhaps a more eloquent manner than I can. And bear with me because I'm going to show you lots of pictures, so I promise you it won't be boring and dry through the whole thing. All right, so let's just start. I'm going to show you a selection of work over about a 12-year period. So it's, skips, chunks of time, probably 5 years at a time sometimes, something like that. I'm going to start with this idea of the notion of exploring the somewhere in between. And what I mean by that is a number of things. I mean the idea of being between two cultures. So having grown up in an Italian family, but being born here in Canada, someone who traverses two cultures. But I also think that in my work, I traverse the past and the present. So I think there's a number of ways that I think of that state of the in-between. I'm going to start with these two ideas by filmmaker Louis Buñuel and theorist Stuart Hall that I think, for me, really articulate some of the things that I'm trying to get at in my work. And I'll just read them. You have to begin to lose your memory, if only in bits and pieces, to realize that memory is what makes our lives. Life without memory is no life at all. Our memory is our coherence, our reason, our feeling, even our action. Without it, we are nothing. And the second idea, I think, that grounds my practice is this idea of identity. Identities are the names we give to the different ways we are positioned by and position ourselves in the narratives of the past. So I'm going to start with this banner photograph that I was invited to make as part of an exhibition that Jeff Thomas, who's an Ottawa-based First Nations photographer, curated. And Jeff asked each of the artists in the exhibition to reflect on the idea of home and what it means to them. And I thought that was really poignant for me in particular. And I'm sure it is for all of us, especially if you come from many different places. And I think more and more in Canada, we see that we have a very diverse population. But in this case, for me, I revisited in 2009, my ancestral village where my parents and grandparents came from. And that's the place on the far left. And then on the far right is the place that I was born, but also where they immigrated in the early 50s. And so this mural is called Facing Home. And the text underneath kind of addresses the feelings, the mixed feelings that I have in these two places. And so I'll read you what it says for those at the back that can't read it. Maybe it says, I come from a family of fig eaters, but I live in a country where they cannot grow. Our family nickname was De Figa, of figs. Where we come from, people are known by their nicknames. Only this year did I learn ours. I walked around the village thinking to myself, I must belong here more than anywhere else. I am of here, but this is not my home. Yet I am not entirely from over there either. I remain ever suspended, somewhere in between here and there, trying to find home. So I think this mural presents for me this, I think the white space in between is very important in this piece because I think it's a kind of mental negotiation that goes on has gone on in my upbringing, in my coming into myself, and as an artist as well. This is my mother's family. My mother is actually the young woman on the ground, not the little girl, but the youngest woman there. And they were tenement farmers. So essentially a senior owned the land, and they worked the property, and they got to keep a percentage of what they were able to earn. And this is pretty much everyone who immigrated on my mother's side except for one sister. And here they are in the 1950s, probably about 7, 8 years after that earlier picture was taken in Niagara Falls, of course, where every family has to go to have their photograph taken if you live in Ontario, especially. So I'm going to read you something from a wonderful book by Andreas Hyacin called In Twilight Memories, where he talks about this notion of the fissure, which is this sort of space or this break in between. And as he says, it does not require much theoretical sophistication to see that all recorded representation, whether in language, narrative, image, or recorded sound, is based on memory. Representation always comes after, even though some media will try to provide us with the delusion of pure presence. And when I think of that idea of pure presence, I'm thinking of the way that we accept the photographic image as pure presence. But once you analyze it, you realize that it's already in the past immediately once the image has been taken. But rather than leading us to some authentic origin or giving us verifiable access to the real, memory, even and especially in its belatedness, is itself based on representation. So what Hyacin goes on to talk about is this idea that this sort of break or this fissure between past and present is a really energetic and creative place from which to work, and I very much agree with that. So I'm going to just give you a little bit of background on some of the ideas in my work before I show you the first video. I think one of the things that I've used the most in my work overall are vernacular photographs or everyday photographs, whether they be snapshots, films, whether I've borrowed those pictures from archives, my own or other people's archives, and sometimes I've reenacted that notion of the archive. And it was great that we had this screening tonight at the Vogue Theater, and you got to, I don't know, for those of you that were there, it sort of is a perfect sort of backdrop, I think, to some of the things I'm going to show you. So the notion of the everyday image and the vernacular is really important to my work. Through that material, I've explored my own family history, but more and more I'm moving away from something that's very personal to something that's much more based in those materials themselves and analyzing them in a different way for their own sake. I just want to comment on the importance of vernacular photography. I think with our iPhones and you know, every way that we are recording images constantly now, we take it for granted. But at an earlier time, it was a phenomenon. And I'll just mention that Pierre Bourdieu, who was a French sociologist, wrote a seminal book in 1965 called Photography, a Middlebrow Art, in which he talks about and examines the relationship between photography and family life. And as he points out, by the mid-60s, photography was fully integrated as part of the ritual of family life. And of course, part of that was to record special festivities or holidays. We saw the little boy in the family movie earlier this evening. The camera plays a key role in solemnizing and immortalizing the high points of family life. So here we see an ad for Eastman Kodak that revolutionized photography by making it cheaply accessible to everyone. This is the Brownie camera that some of you may have seen or even perhaps had a chance to play with. You know, the popular slogan, "You press the button, we'll do the rest." The Brownies, I think, could shoot something like 100 photographs in that range, and you just sent the whole thing back, and they developed it for you, printed it for you, and sent it back loaded for you. And next thing you knew, everybody had photo albums. So it really changed everything. So, you know, this is an early iPhone here. All right. So I'm going to start by showing you a video. It's 5 minutes long called Snow. I'm just going to give you a tiny bit of background to this film. So as I mentioned, vernacular images are kind of the base of what I've been working with for a long time. This piece was made from home movies from the late 1950s, early 60s. These are not my home movies. These are movies I collected from friends. I think 1 or 2 of them belong to my family. But what I was trying to look at in this piece that I put together is the idea of our excruciating desire in these films to hold on to these stories. So for those of you who grew up with home movies, and I think there's a lot of young faces in here, so probably not all of you did, but a few of us have. The way these movies worked was your uncle or whoever was assigned in your family to shoot these films would have these little rolls of film. They were Super 8, 3 minutes long. You'd shoot them at whatever special occasion or several. So you'd watch the movies at home and there'd be, oh, there's our birthday party. Oh, no, there's so-and-so's wedding. And then, it would flip to something else. Or there's our road trip. And then near the end of the film, and that's sort of what this piece is about, near the end of the film, these little floating white dots would appear. And that would signal the end of the film. And when I was watching these films growing up, I always got butterflies when those dots came because I knew the happy moments would soon be over. And what I found out later on in examining these films on a light table was that, in fact, what those holes are a number code, which Kodak punched into the roll of the film before you got it, and you actually filmed over it. But essentially, it was a way to number your film roll. It was like a batch code and a film reel code so that when you sent your film in to be processed, they knew which one was yours, and they'd send it back to you because they had the correct number. But in viewing it, the experience of it is it signals the end. And so what I decided to do was to collect endings and just string ending after ending together. So this film is based on that, and it's called Snow. 5 minutes, please enjoy. So I'm going to show you a couple of photographic projects. I work between the two mediums pretty consistently, although I would say that I work primarily in photography, for sure. This body of work is the first project I did after graduate school in Halifax. It was a very interesting time, a difficult time, I would say, because I think in graduate school you're cocooned in this wonderful sort of creative atmosphere, surrounded by all these amazing creative people and access to facilities, and then you have to go out into real life, the cold reality of real life, and have to figure out, how do I continue to do this thing on my own now? And that was a real challenge at the beginning, for sure. This project happened in a way by accident. It happened out of a desire to try to figure out where I was at that time and what I should do next. And what had happened was that I had had this very beautiful, expensive camera, and I lost it. It's a long story. And at the time, it really traumatized me, so I decided to just carry a cheap plastic camera called a Holga, which has become very popular now, but 15 years ago when I did this project, not a lot of people were playing with them too much. And I just carried it in my purse all the time. So I felt this kind of freedom with this camera, and I started photographing very much on the go, on the run, wherever I was. I'd moved back to Ontario, which was where I grew up, from Halifax. And this camera is notoriously bad. It's made of plastic, the lens is terrible, and it leaks light. And for my purposes at that time, once I started to see the images that it was producing, metaphorically it felt very much that it was connecting to something I was trying to explore in terms of revisiting sites that I had grown up with, feeling a sense of sort of disconnection from those sites, and returning to them. And so all the ways that the camera was damaging my images in a way, flooding them, creating these interruptions, really felt like they were translating some of the things that I was conceptually thinking about. But that only came through a couple of years of shooting with it and looking at stuff and beginning to really find interesting what was going on. So I'll show you a series of images. This one's called Marianne with Fire. It's actually my niece running through a field in the rain. And I find it, for me, a very spiritual image. This is a double farm field. I played with the camera in such a way that I took the backing off so that images could run into one another and there wouldn't be a solid separation of frame to frame. So that way, in a way, they became like film strips. So it mimicked a lot looking at the films that I had been looking at also previously. This one's called Swimmers. It's actually probably about 4 exposures running into each other. So again, it really is cinematic in a way because it's an unfolding of time. There's a detail of that image. This one's called Small Swimmers. I also shot some of them in Halifax. This is Triple C. This is Digby Neck. Train window. So the movement and the sense of transition were very important to the way that I was thinking and feeling at the time. Also, bits of notions of childhood appear in the series. So all of these little hints at a kind of mental space, I think. This inside and outside simultaneously being the viewer out the window, looking into the past. All of those kinds of notions, I think, come out through these pictures. In a way, the title of this project is pretty self-explanatory. But I think it does need a little bit of background. So about 10 years after my father passed away, I believe it or not, accidentally discovered his wallet in a box of family memorabilia. My sister had packed up this box of old family photographs saying, you know, you're the person that loves that kind of stuff. You take this. And I never got to it. I really found it difficult to look into the box, actually. So I packed it away and I stuck it in a closet for 10 years. And one day my niece phoned me and said, you know, you're the family history person. I'm supposed to do a project for my sociology class. Can you help me with that and send me some pictures? So I started going through this box and I discovered my father's wallet in the bottom of it. And when I saw it, I recognized it immediately. I knew exactly what it was. And I also knew that immediately I needed to open it, take everything out, spread it all out on a table, and when I saw the contents, I knew immediately I had to photograph it. And that happened within about 10 minutes of finding it. It really was this very intuitive, forceful response. What I saw when I spread everything out on a table was a portrait of someone. The sheer volume in the wallet surprised me. There were 54 items, including driver's license, old photographs, receipts, all those sort of, you know, Canadian Tire cards we all carry around, all that kind of stuff. I could place every object within the trajectory of his life and history. I was most amazed to see all the old photographs he had. Those precious black and white fiber-based deckled edge prints we don't see very much anymore. There were images taken of his parents in Italy that he carried around. My mother as a young woman. A picture of his uncle that died in the war. And my niece, age 6, which was the last time he saw her. This is my niece who continues in my wallet 7 years later. I was touched to realize that he'd carried these mementos of loved ones with him every day, for I knew that there are few such pictures in my own wallet. It seems the wallet as photo album is a dying tradition, something undertaken by another generation that honored the photograph as object, a generation untouched by the digital age. The more time I spent examining the objects, the more I began to see how these items built a portrait of my father. So there was clear information indicating that he was an Italian immigrant, that he worked in the steel industry, that he had a wife and children, and that he loved to go hunting. Yet I also saw a great discrepancy between what one could read about my father at face value and the things that no one could glean unless they'd known him. The wallet seemed to both say so much and so little. Now, this is a very important item in my father's wallet. It's a prescription for nitroglycerin tablets. My father died in heart surgery, and this object in his wallet prefigures his death, actually. But that's what I mean about there being so many things in my father's wallet that are at once so personal and at another time so mysterious. Because unless you know the history of his life or why he was carrying around, for example, receipts for furniture, I knew that he was carrying those around because he'd recently sold our family home because my mother had passed away. So at face value, you wouldn't know what those objects meant. They're quite ordinary. So things in someone's wallet are both ordinary and very special, I think. So then I decided to also photograph my wallet. And the reason I decided to do that was because I felt a little bit guilty, you know, photographing my father's things without his permission. And I felt that if I was going to put his stuff out in public, then I had to put myself on the line in the same way. So then once I did that, something shifted in the project that I wasn't expecting. At first, I thought it was a portrait of my father and a portrait of me. But then I began to realize that I couldn't do that without suggesting our relationship. And I couldn't do that without suggesting 2 generations. I couldn't do that without suggesting the fact that he was an immigrant and I grew up here and was born here. And so that there are clues in our wallets that talk about those kinds of things, our class difference, our work difference, our life difference in our experiences. You know, and I love it says fine arts. So you know I'm an artist because it says so in my wallet. My dad had a hunting license. I have cinema, gallery, and those kinds of cards. It also says photography in my wallet. So I want to talk a little bit about the family images that you saw in Regular 8. Those pictures really haunted me. Those films really haunted me. And I kept thinking to myself while I was in graduate school, how can I capture those? How can I make stills of those? And I did things like tried to run the films through an enlarger and project through them and make 4x5 negatives. It worked, but it was completely painstaking. And in the end, even though they got slightly sharper than the teeny tiny, like Super 8 films of this big, the frame, they looked really mushy and I wasn't happy with them. So I sort of let that project go. But it stayed with me. I just couldn't get rid of it somehow. 10 years later, I somehow had this idea that, you know, why don't I just make them up? Why don't I just make my own film stills? I don't have to use real ones. I could just pretend. I don't know where this idea came from. So I decided that's exactly what I would do. So I began to re-examine home movies. I started purchasing them online. I looked at other friends. You can view a lot of stuff online now, of course. And I started to really think about the genre. I started to think about the kinds of scenes that everybody has in their home movies. In a way, all of our home movies are almost exactly the same. It's always a birthday party, a wedding, a special occasion. Everybody's dressed up. They're having a good time. You don't see home movies of people fighting very much or crying. You know, it's always a celebration of some kind. So inspired by these films, I started to stage my own scenes. I styled all of the people in the pictures by making a deal with a local vintage store on my street. And I promised them that I would give them photographs in exchange for lending me clothes. And some of the clothes I borrowed were very expensive clothes, so they were really great. They gave me great advice about things that were appropriate to the period. I haunted a lot of Sally Ann's, you know, to buy wool mittens and wool scarves and hats. And I got all of my friends involved in the shooting. This was shot on film, on 645, and I then scanned the negatives and brought them into Photoshop and created these strip-like illusions to the film stills that we'll see. So this one's called The Skaters. So now, basically, I'm able to sort of hold on to these iconic moments. What I was trying to do, and this was really tricky, I was trying to shoot like someone, for those of you who may have seen the film screening earlier, they're amateur films. So the camera, they're moving around, following people, and they're very jiggly and really poorly shot. And I was trying to mimic that way of shooting, which is very difficult if you're trained not to shoot like that. So I had to kind of work against my own instinct and my own training. And what I began to do in the films was to really just loosen up and walk. And I tried to also imagine, who am I in this scenario? Am I her boyfriend? You know, if you look at the films, you often know that the shooter is a man or an uncle. Sometimes the mom picks up the camera too and switches it around, and you see the dad with the little boy doing things. So, you know, it's interesting to imagine who's the shooter, you know, who's holding the camera. And I really started to think that way. So in this case, I could be, you know, Uncle Bob or, you know, whoever, but creating these scenarios of family life, basically. Sometimes the scenes were inspired by actual films that I had seen, and I wanted to restage them as accurately as I could. Other times, as in this case, I was driving in northern Toronto, and I saw this fountain, and I knew I just had to shoot on this site. So there was a lot of location scouting that went on to make this series, a lot of visiting the site and shooting it digitally first to see where the light was coming from at certain times of day so that I could get what I wanted. This is in Garlock on Lake Ontario in Oakville, High Park. And there's cheating going on, because in a real Super 8 film, the frames, you would never have that kind of a jump from one frame to the next, but artists can do things like that. You can cheat. This is one of my favorites, and there's a great anecdote that goes with it. So my friend in the center is a writer, and she wrote this beautiful piece, actually, that I'm really fortunate to have, called The View from Inside the Photograph. And she talks about being in these clothes and how it made her feel, and how looking at her own wrist with her grandmother's watch on made her sort of travel through time, and seeing her husband in this outfit made her think of his dad. It was really beautiful. But as we were at Niagara Falls, you know, you're surrounded by this chaos of tourists, and outside, just outside of that black line of the frame, you know, there's people all over. And, you know, I'm trying my best to, you know, create this illusion and keep the people with running shoes out of my shot, you know. And at one point, you know, we're shooting away, and people are starting to notice this family in these beautiful clothes. And we finish shooting, and this young woman comes up to my friend and says, "Are you from England?" And she says, "No, we're from the 1950s. The same thing happened with the skater image. We were on the rink, you know, and I was really worried that people would skate into our shot, and somehow this, you know, we got on the ice and people just stood back. And one woman said, "It's so beautiful." And they just saw it as this like play unfolding or something, and they just sort of stayed out of our space and let me take pictures. It was pretty magical. This one I think you recognize from the film. This is actually a real little family. I won't tell you how much in that shot is actually fake, but the family is real. This was one of the few that I painstakingly restaged from one of the scenes from a film, because I love the way the filmmaker wasn't shooting the bride. Obviously, he was more interested in the bridesmaids. And he was looking like right over the bride's shoulder, who's off to the right-hand side. You just see her veil, and he's checking out the good-looking girls at the wedding. In 2009, I decided that I had some time off in the summertime, and that it was time to really do some family history research in earnest, because my favorite aunt, who lives in this small ancestral village, who's now 88, was, you know, getting on, and I realized that if I didn't go and spend some time there, that I would really be losing connection to this history. So I stayed with my aunt for 2 months. My aunt lives in a village of 1,000 people. This is Montotone. It's on the Adriatic coast of Italy. If you know where Rome is on the Mediterranean side, this is on the other side of the country. It's about 20 minutes from the ocean. It's very beautiful. This town was built in the 11th century, and it's very common. This isn't very special in this part of the country, I have to say. There's hill town after hill town after hill town, just like this. I think it's special, but they don't think it's very special. It has 4 churches. The top one is a Baroque church. It's quite, for me, pretty amazing place. So my great-grandparents were from this village. We have a family crypt in the village. My great-uncle was the village miller. And what I went there really for was to try and understand what life was like for people as farmers, and to try and understand why my parents left, to try and understand what life was like after the war, what they went through living through the Second World War. Really, from talking to people firsthand, I really wanted to get a sense of it. And staying with my aunts there, of course we had cappuccino every afternoon after lunch. I mean, even though I was there, I had the whole day to work. It was very busy because when we got up in the morning, we had to talk about what we were going to eat for lunch. And then we had to make lunch. And then you had to go out for coffee after lunch. So it was really, I had to try to find time to squeeze in time to work. You know, you have to mold yourself to the life of the people that are there. But I had a wonderful time. So my 2 aunts, the one on the left is my mother's sister. The one on the right is my mother's cousin. They've lived across the street from each other their entire lives. They know everyone in this village. And of course, after 2 months, I did too. And it was pretty magical. So one of the things my aunts were able to do for me was to connect me with other older people in the village. And I asked people to pull out their old photographs and to talk to me about their life experience. And that's when this happened. I didn't really go with a plan of what I was going to photograph when I got there, but it unfolded through time. And the series is called Lacrimosa because of this photograph. And this is a grave portrait. In Italy and many countries in Europe, this was a process that was patented in France in the 18th century, in the 19th century, late 19th century, where they are able to fire photographs onto ceramic. And so then these ovals get placed in graves. And in Italy, it's still practiced, so now they're in color and they're modern, but I don't like those ones as much. I think these older ones are just so amazing. So the other thing in this village, and in many villages, you'll notice the light. They light the graves at night. So every grave has a glowing light. And if you walk in, it's like Christmas. You know, it just glows. And it's really hauntingly beautiful in the true sense of the term. But this portrait, underneath it, it says, sinceramente lacrimate, which means sincerely cried for. And I thought the sentiment was so beautiful. And lacrimosa is a movement in the Requiem Mass. It's the movement of tears. And lacrima is Latin for tear. So I felt the whole idea was apropos to this project. So people were very kind, and I asked them to show me their most important or favorite photograph, and that's what these are. So I'll just flip through. This is Adelina. She made the poster, didn't she, at the school? This one is very significant to me. This is Maddalena, who's is passed away since I took this photograph. I think this picture tells you how important photographs were to people at that time. Written in red ink on the front of this photograph says, "Everyone in the family except me. I was in Spain in 1937." So the father is at war, and he can't be there for this formal family portrait. He would have been obviously to the left of the woman. And it's so important to him that he's missing, that he's inserted himself in the photograph by writing on the front of it. Think of what photographs meant to people. That's, to me, what looking at this photographs means to me. And they would have gone to a photo studio, put on their best outfits, 5x7 camera comes out. I mean, it's pretty amazing. I feel the reverence in these images. This was a wedding photograph, so it was taken during the war. People didn't have, a lot, so they wore their best and nicest clothes for such an occasion, not in the same way that we do now with long dresses and so forth. She's holding a little boy in the picture. It kind of curled though, so it kind of goes out of focus, which I kind of like. This is a First Communion photograph. This lady has passed away since I took this photograph. This is my Aunt Sylvia, the lady with the blue eyes you saw earlier. She's the baby in this picture, so this photograph's over 80 years old. And that's her husband. Okay, this guy. You all can tell who this guy is, right? He's the lover of the village. Oh yeah, Nico. So Nico, we used to meet him having coffee in the afternoon. Always had dirty jokes from my aunts. And my aunts would laugh and sort of hide their faces in embarrassment and then ask for more. So he agreed to pose for me with his Elvis type picture. This one's slightly different in how it's posed, but it was very important to this man that it be taken in this way because the tree is in the photograph, and he was born in this house, and he wanted to show me the tree behind his hand. So in addition to when I exhibited this project, in addition to the portraits, across, it was sort of exhibited the last time I showed it in this sort of very long space. Across from the hand portraits, I exhibited these grave portraits, which may seem like a strange decision, but I feel in a way that they go together very well. This is how they were installed, because the graves, when you go into the cemetery, are very higgledy-piggledy like that, especially the older part. They're not uniform. They're all sort of designed separately, so they all appear at different heights. This is Pierina. I felt there was a relationship for me between the generation of those people and their relationship to the cemetery. My aunts go to the cemetery every week, and they really feel it's important to respect the elders. They tend the graves. And I read a really interesting article about the relationship between these grave portraits and Catholicism, which I thought really made a lot of sense to me, because in the Catholic faith, you're supposed to pray for people who are deceased so that you can get them out of purgatory and into heaven. And when you see someone's face, you connect with them more. So maybe you'll pray a little bit more for them. They become more real. It reminds you of their presence in a different way than a name and a date will do. This young woman died at the age of 16. And to this day, she is considered the most beautiful girl in the village. And people will bring fresh flowers to her grave still. I think there's just a very different tradition there and connection than we have here, and in my experience, with death and with maintaining that connection. So these were all shot at night. This means here the remains. What I just realized recently was that these two died on the same day. My aunt told me they had a double funeral. She went to it. So I'm getting close to the end. I'm just going to hint at what I'm working on now. I think it's both a continuity and a slight departure. This is a photograph that I purchased on eBay. It's an anonymous family photograph. By looking at it under a microscope, I can tell you that there are 48 stars on the flag, which tells me that it might have been taken somewhere between 1912, when the US had 48 states, and into the early 20s, I would say, because of the clothing still has a Victorian sort of styling to it. There are 42 people in the picture. There are more women than men. It was printed on printing out paper, which was common in that time. It was shot by a large format camera. We don't know why people are gathered for this occasion. It looks like some kind of special family occasion because there's a banner on the building that looks like it's red, white, and blue. What got me interested in buying this picture was kind of going through this process of collecting old photographs over time. I had a lot of portraits in particular, and thinking about this idea of this promise of photography to preserve us. And yet, here I was purchasing all these photographs of people that had been lost, that had been somehow dislodged from their histories. You know, I could buy a portrait for $1 or less. And somehow this picture seemed to not matter to someone anymore, or somehow the lineage of the family got broken and they just became these things that no one wanted anymore. And it somehow they just, for me, felt incredibly sad. And I remembered watching this film with Christian Boltanski narrating, and he said that they say we die twice, once when we die and a second time when no one recognizes our picture. And I started really contemplating this notion of a second death. And I decided that I wanted to think about a different way to give life to an image. If I couldn't do it through identity, if I couldn't do it through history, what was another way of translating being in existential terms, really? So I decided that I would work with a choir, and I would translate the piece chorally, that we would create a piece of music and have their being performed through voice. So right now, I'm almost finished this piece. I'll be exhibiting it in April. And what I do is actually take this photograph into After Effects and animate it. So we do things like we're able to make the dresses move. We can make the bows and the hair flutter. The flag waves, the banner moves, the tree moves, and we take it through the life of a photographic cycle. We start with the image as a group of people in silhouette, and then it moves through a processing phase, and then the photograph comes to life. I travel a sort of key spotlight through the whole image so that you can see every portrait. And then eventually, the light of day passes through the image. So you see this daylight pass, and some of the figures cast shadows. And actually, shadows from outside the frame get cast inside as well. And then it just fades to white, which is how this photograph would die. And I worked with the Ryerson University Choir, which was an amazing experience. And so when I present this photograph, it will be projected life-size with surround sound speakers, so that basically you are immersed as a viewer in the atmosphere of the photograph. You become part of the space of the image. We also use some sounds outside the photograph that they would have heard, birds and wind and other sort of local atmospheric sounds. So that's one thing that I'm doing. I'm also transforming carte de visite. So I'm not going to tell you what I'm doing with them yet because it's not quite done yet, so I feel nervous. But in addition to the video portion is these other carte de visite, which I'm also translating into other beings, if you will. But I think I think you'll see that consistently I've been interested in vernacular images and the images of our everyday lives and what they mean to us in our lives. And now I'm moving more away, I think, from investigating a personal history, which was really inspiring to me when I started doing it in graduate school, and I think really carried me through. But now I'm becoming more interested in the genre, I think, more broadly, and in a way moving more towards anonymous images than ones that I know and am familiar with. So I think that's all I have to say. I'm open to questions of any kind. Thank you. You know, I use different cameras for different things. So right now I'm using the Canon 5D. I'm shooting digitally, and I started shooting digitally in Italy because I knew that there it would be really hard for me to get my film processed and be able to see what I was doing, and I needed to be able to do that really, quickly. So I bought that camera before I left. But for me, it's so related to the project that I'm doing that I'm not married to one medium or another. No, it changes from project to project. My students get into these moral discussions about analog good, digital bad. And it's like, it doesn't really matter to me. I just think they're tools. We have to learn to use them thoughtfully, intelligently, and, it's about the work in the end. I did. I certainly could have manipulated that and made them look older, but I wanted there to be this double take, between now and then, because really that's what the work is about for me. It's about this desire, but the impossibility. Good question. And some people were fooled, of course, and some people were not. But some people who were fooled surprised me. They just walked in and they just assumed that, of course, that's what they were. And other people knew right away, no, that's not possible, both technically and also because of the styling. It's not exactly, you can never get it quite right. It suggests something, but it's never really the real thing. So yes, for sure, the sharpness, I made a decision that it would stay that way. Yeah. That's a very good question. I was on a panel 2 weeks ago with my friend who's a fiction writer, and she wrote a family history recently, and she was talking about the fact that even when you're writing nonfiction, like if you're looking at an archive, there's a place that you can't go any further. And in story writing, in her case, she had to invent some stuff because otherwise it's really dry. If you're writing some kind of a story, you have to have some, let's put it, informed conjecture, if you will. Maybe I'm just more interested in that now, in my own imagination.